Alright, folks, in today's grammar lesson, we're talking about clauses. Now, you may say, what's a clause? It's not Santa, not when we're talking about grammar. Okay, a clause is a group of words that has a subject and a predicate. So we've been talking a lot about subjects and predicates. Subjects tell who or what the sentence is about, and predicates tell what the subject is or does. Okay, subjects and predicates. So a clause is just a group of words that has both of those things. Okay, so here's an example. Santa flew over my city. It's a clause because it has a subject, Santa, and it has a predicate, flew over my city. It tells who or what the sentence is about, and it tells what the subject is or does. In this case, Santa, the subject, is flying over my city. That's the predicate. It tells what the subject did or is doing. Okay? You might call this a sentence. It's a sentence because it has a subject, a verb, and it tells a complete thought. It also starts with a capital letter and it ends with a punctuation. So we know that this is a complete sentence. So it's true, it's a complete sentence. A sentence is a type of clause. It's actually a type of clause that we call an independent clause. Independent clause. Because it's a complete sentence. I said it don't need no help. This sentence doesn't need any help to be a complete sentence. It's a complete sentence by itself. So it's independent, okay? Independent clauses stand on their own. They don't need no help. They don't need no help. They are independent on their own. They tell a complete thought or a complete sentence on their own. Okay? Well, let's look then at the other kind of clause. We just talked about the independent clause. That's this guy right here. See him? He is walking on his own, doing just a fine old job walking. But this dependent clause right here needs some help. Really, really needs some help. Obviously, he's hanging on to the independent guy's foot and he's like being dragged along. He cannot walk on his own. He does not form a complete thought on his own. But he does have a subject and a predicate because he's a clause. And all clauses have subjects and predicates. So he has a subject and a predicate. That's the clause part. But he cannot walk on his own because he's dependent on the independent clause. Dependent clauses need an independent clause to be a complete thought or a complete sentence. Okay, let's look at some examples of what that might look like. When I go to school. When I go to school. Well, let's check because I is the subject, right? Go to school is the predicate. So it's a clause for sure because it has a subject and it has a predicate. But when I go to school, that's not a complete thought because you're left asking, what? When I go to school, what? Like, what happens when you go to school? The thought is not complete. This is a dependent clause. Let's look at another example. Although he is my brother. Okay, he, that's the subject. The predicate is my brother. It tells what the subject is in this case. He is my brother. But when it has this word at the start, although he is my brother, what? What? It's not complete. That does not tell a complete thought. It doesn't conclude. It's not a full, complete sentence because you're left asking what. Let's look at one more. Since we don't have school on Friday. Since we don't have school on Friday, what? What about it, right? I have a subject, we. That's who doesn't have school. Don't have school. That's the predicate. But this whole thing is not a complete thought because there's something missing. Since we don't have school on Friday, what? Okay, so all of these are examples of dependent clauses. They need an independent clause to go with them, okay? They cannot stand on their own. You may notice each of those dependent clauses that we just looked at began with a certain kind of word. So let's go back again and let me show you what words I'm talking about. When, although, and since. Notice how because of those words at the start of each of these sentences, it made this clause not be a complete sentence. If I took off, let's look for example. If I were to hold on. I'm gonna use a white one of these. Okay. If I were to take that word off like this, he is my brother. Yeah, that's a complete thought. But when we have that word although, it makes it not an independent clause anymore because it needs more after that. What about if I take off when? I go to school. That's a complete thought. That's an independent clause. But when I have this word here, when I go to school, that's not a complete thought. So that's dependent. And here, if I took off since, we don't have school on Friday. That's just a declarative sentence, right? But when we have since at the front, it's now dependent because it needs more information. It's not a complete thought. So each of those words that I was just talking about, we call these subordinating conjunctions. So we already learned about the regular conjunctions. Those were the fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Those were the regular conjunctions, okay? Now we have subordinating conjunctions, and there's a lot more of these. Here's some examples. Than, rather than, if, since, although, whatever, that, though, where. You don't have to memorize these, but you should become familiar with them because it will help you to identify dependent clauses, because dependent clauses begin with one of these subordinating conjunctions, just like our examples back here. Okay, I'm about to pause this video, and you're going to tell me thumbs up, thumbs middle, or thumbs down if you agree with this statement. I can explain the difference between independent and dependent clauses. Thumbs up, thumbs middle, thumbs down. What do you think? Okay, so let's try now to use these same dependent clauses, but add an independent clause to them to make them a complete sentence, okay? This is going to be fun. All right, I'm going to add in a different color just so we can see. When I go to school, I bring my lunchbox. When I go to school, I bring my lunchbox. What do you think? Do we have a complete sentence now? When I go to school, I bring my lunchbox. Yes. I'm not left asking, what? What do you do when you go to school? Now I know. Now I know when you go to school, you bring your lunchbox. So this is a complete thought. So we have in yellow right here our dependent clause. And right here we have an independent clause. When I go to school, dependent. I bring my lunchbox, independent. That's independent because if I were to take that away and just look at the green, I bring my lunchbox, it's a complete sentence. So that's independent. Independent. Okay. We could identify subjects and predicates here. Subject we already found for this one was I, and the subject in the independent clause is also I. The predicate, go to school, and the predicate in this one, in the independent clause, is bring my lunchbox. So we have just created a complete sentence. Let's do the next one. Although he is my brother, he gets on my nerves Sorry. Okay. Although he is my brother, he gets on my nerves. We need a comma. Of course, we need a comma right here. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. Although he is my brother, he gets on my nerves. Now we have a complete sentence. We joined our dependent clause with an independent clause. The green is independent because you could say that on its own. It can stand on its own. But this first part, the dependent clause, cannot stand on its own. So it's dependent on this. Okay? Last one. Since we don't have school on Friday, I will watch a movie. Okay? Since we don't have school on Friday, I will watch a movie. Let me scoot it over. Since we don't have school on Friday, I will watch a movie. That's what I'm doing instead of going to school. Okay? So now we have a complete sentence. It tells a complete thought. We have this dependent clause right here. Since we don't have school on Friday, that's our dependent clause. And our independent clause is I will watch a movie. You could just say I will watch a movie. And it stands on its own. Okay? What we have just created are called complex sentences. So you may remember so far we've learned about simple sentences. That's just a independent clause, right? A complete sentence that has a subject and a predicate. We also learned about compound sentences where we joined two simple sentences together with a conjunction, a fanboy conjunction. Now we have complex sentences. These are the sentences that have one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. So looking back at here, all of these sentences have an independent clause, that's this part, the part that stands on their own, okay? But they also have these dependent clauses connected, okay? So all of these are complex sentences.